I was about to
All right, we looked through it, and we did. Our dissertation was about being an African American woman, gender and race, the writings of 6 Black women journalists. And I did chapter 1. It was constructing the meaning of being an African American woman. The thesis was the other thesis was basically like race and gender were obstacles for women to overcome in the media, and the 6 Black female journalists. They developed a place for women in the media to receive information, cultural or political, from women's perspective. The main points in the chapter was like newspapers, like, they ignored the issues of Black people unless their behavior was offensive, and women and African Americans were hardly even acknowledged in the media. Media was like the main influence of the American culture as it is today. It determines basically like which group is the dominant group, like the norms in society. That's what it basically determines. And like one time it was like a law in the South, and it was unwritten, but no Blacks were even allowed to be in any type of print. So if they were in the picture, the picture was either discarded or airbrushed, so you wouldn't see the Black people in it. The conclusion was like it was difficult for African American females to develop a voice in the mainstream media. The 6 journalists, they helped develop a voice for the women in the mainstream media back in the early 19th century. Now that they have accomplished and broken down some barriers, women now have a voice in the mainstream media. I did chapter 2, the shaping of African American women journalists, the context. Well, as we all know, African Americans have always had hard times. They've been through racism, unemployment, segregation, and discrimination, and that all led to abolitionists and anti-slavery. And the unemployment was serious, so back in the time, in the 19th century, the Blacks began to venture out, and by doing so, they started establishing journals. John B. Russworm and Sammy Cornish established a journal called the Freedom's Journal, of which they spoke on the issues of the Black community. And in response to their journal, they received a letter from a lady named Matilda. And in her letter, she expressed that the neglect of women's issues and how they should be accredited and acknowledged for the things that they do. I mean, they were the ones at home, the caretakers, taking care of the kids in the home, but they weren't being acknowledged as they should. So that's what her letter was. On this slide is a graph of the expectations they set, because in the journalism community, they set high expectations for which they aim for success, and they plan to cover equality, government, racial advancement, and religion, which is very important. They also believe the audience would be whites, Blacks, adults, and youth who weren't very educated, and they believe that their press would, of course, be local, national, and worldwide. And of course, the reporters were knowledgeable and they had skills. Garland Penn published a book on the African American society, and while writing the book, he asked established men such as Thomas Fortune and Frederick Douglass what they thought about the press, and they didn't agree with the mainstream abolitionist journals because they weren't satisfied and their concerns and questions weren't being met. And then Bishop Benjamin W. Arnett was asked why he believed the black press was important, and he said the reporters should have experience in the communities that they write about, because that doesn't make sense, because that's like saying if you went to somebody else's hood, you can't say this and that about it because you have no experience and you don't know what it's like there. So basically, you have to be about what you write about, and that's what he pretty much is saying. The 6 women who were studied in this dissertation, they established themselves very well, and their main goal was to enrich and encourage the other women of the community, of the black community, because I mean it was a way to tell their story, and it was another point of view except for the white man or even just a black man. It was a way to establish themselves.
Yeah, I did chapter 3. It was analyzing the writings of 6 African American women, the methods. It basically goes through and explains how Nora Roberts went about finding each of the women's writings. The 6 women were Mary Ann Shadd Cary, Charlotte L. Fortin, Josephine St. Pierre Ruffin, Gertrude E. H. Mossel, Victoria Earl Matthews, and Ida B. Wells Barnett. Hall first tracked down all of the writings of each woman. She looked through all their journals, all their articles. She noted where they came from, what type of writing it was, when it was written, how long it was written. She discovered that the women wrote all kinds of writings, such as fiction books, speeches, sketches, circulars, issue papers, and poetry. She also collected background information in each of the women. She found out what their families were like, where they came from, what their occupations were, what their economic circumstances were, what they did for money, how they got money, and many of their life experiences. From doing this, she found that the women wrote or contributed to 91 publications over 78 years and in 16 states, and also the District of Columbia, Canada, and London. The most common themes throughout the writings were race and gender discrimination. Hall gave a quote that basically noted that these 6 women really kind of set the bounds for all the women in their times. They did things that they weren't really supposed to do, but they got permission to do them, so they were the exception. Wells Barnett, for example, was allowed to attend and cover an illegal lynching of African Americans, and Matthews exposed employment scams in the U.S. Through research, Hall finds that the women likely became journalists because of their backgrounds and their experiences, and they most likely wanted to challenge the things that were going on in their time and try and help their society and change things if they could. Their experiences of different races, genders, and cultures really affected their works, and another thing she found that really affected them was what was going on in the times, and that was the Civil War.
Hi, my name is Sydney Carr, and I did chapter 3. It was on analyzing the writings of chapter 4, my bad. It was labor for the human rights in pre-Civil War, yeah. This lady named Mary Ann Cary, she believed in education. She wanted like everybody to go to school and like get an education, and she just wanted everybody to She wanted everybody to have freedom and and she did her writings in like newspapers, articles, and she was an abolitionist, which criticized black separation, I don't know, groups. And then she wanted like the Africans, no, the slaves to move up north to get jobs and to like be free, since down south they weren't free. And then she suggested that they like go to like islands such as Trinidad, Jamaica, and yeah.
How you doing? My name is Anthony Huntz, and I'm going over Charlotte Fortin. And she was born in 1837 in Philadelphia, and she was an educated writer and also a teacher. She made most of her money from being a teacher because that's what her father and also her grandparents had went over that a black woman in those times would be. This time took place in like the Civil War back in like 1862, I believe. That's when she was doing her most writings. And also she was one of the first black women to write for a Civil War newspaper in those times because it was mostly predominantly white. And also she was with Carrie. Also her and Carrie were the two first black females to work for a Civil War newspaper. Also, she was born into a wealthy family because her grandfather was also a good salesman in those times. He was one of the most known black businessmen in those. He was worked for sales and boats. She was born into a wealthy family, and her mother died when Charlotte was 3 years old. So she was mostly raised with her aunts and uncles. She went to predominantly white schools and excelled because her family felt that black women in those times need harder structure. She is best known for her personal writings that she did many books on in journals into the late 19th century. In the year 1862, she was one of the revolutionaries, and because she went to St. Helena in South Carolina and taught free black slaves how to read and write. And they also wanted to see if blacks were capable of understanding work, and also understanding that they want to learn in those times. Here she worked as a teacher for a few years, but got sick and had to go back to Philadelphia. There she began teaching again until she gained strength and came back to finish teaching the free Africans. In South Carolina, this was also known as a military base where where the Union was taken over, and they had stationary camps over there. So they had the control over, because they were basically trying to do a study on the sea. They were trying to see a study, so the military funded it. So it was basically a lot of military soldiers watching over the Africans and making sure they didn't get good treatment, because it was still racism in the South. So they were still trying to, not as far as the soldiers, but as far as the white Southerners that was still down there, there still was a lot more hate crimes. So there was still a lot of violence in those times. Charlotte Fern later died at the age of 77 in Philadelphia. She was unfortunately did not give birth to any. She did not give birth to any children because it unfortunately died in the womb. She also had a husband named Robert Fortin. She married him when she was at the age of 35 and he was at the age of 28. In conclusion, that this story, I learned a lot about Charlotte Fortin because I was understanding that how black women back in those times were able to gain a lot of exposure to different things as far as teaching, and also being one of the revolutionaries and teaching free black slaves, because mostly they wanted the white women, so a black woman to excel in writing really helped out the race and helped Africans become more involved in the educational system. Again, I'm Anthony Hooks, and have a good day.